2005, in a small town in the Pacific Northwest, a local cop is about to make the biggest bust of his career. His target, the president of the Bandidos, America's largest outlaw motorcycle club. Their crimes are kidnapping, gun running, and racketeering. But this is not a normal case. Cop and biker have known each other for years. They come from the same small town and have a mutual respect for each other.
I mean, we see each other in town. I go up and say hi to him.
I was glad to see Al.
When it comes to making a bust, will the cop be able to bring down the Bandido Nation? Weggers has risen through the ranks and controls 2,400 bikers, organized into 90 chapters across the United States and as far away as Australia, Malaysia, and Denmark. Even though Jensen and Weggers are on opposite sides of the law, cop and biker have a grudging respect for each other.
George and I have a unique way.
Jensen believes Weggers is directing a criminal organization involved in theft, drug running, and racketeering. He might not want to see Weggers gunned down, but he does want to see him sent to jail.
He's on one side of the line, I'm on the other side of the line, and he knows it. He takes the criminal side, I'm on the law enforcement side.
Cop and biker have spent 2 decades facing off across Bellingham streets when they're unexpectedly brought together by a tragedy. In 2001, Al Jensen's son dies. All those that attend the funeral witness a remarkable event. George Weggers, riding at the head of a pack of bandidos, pulls up to the cemetery to pay his respects to the cop who's hunting him down.
When his son died, I went to the funeral. Al came over and, he gave me a big hug. Told him that, you're a cop, I'm a bandito. Today we're just fathers.
In his moment of deepest grief, Al Jensen accepts the comfort Weggers offers. The history of these two men can be traced back to the moment that Weggers becomes an outlaw biker. In 1972, age 20, George Weggers divorces his wife and joins the Bandidos, who have a growing reputation for heavy drinking, fast women, and reckless hell raising.
We fought all over town, through the stripper bars, the beer bars, the whiskey bars, and out in the middle of the streets, on a real regular basis. And it was a lot of fun.
Weggers moves in and hangs out with veteran biker Jimmy Garman.
Get up in the morning, if it wasn't raining, we get on the motorcycles and just head out. No particular place to go, just out looking for adventure wherever we found it. Might take us days, might take us weeks, might take us a couple hours.
As a biker himself, Detective Jensen starts to take an interest in the activities of the Bellingham chapter of the Bandidos.
I got to know pretty well most of the people in the club that were within our community.
The cops have a really low opinion of the Bandidos.
They were a dirty club. I mean, their colors were dirty. They were the kind of the low life of part of the outlaw motorcycle organization.
The Bandidos revel in their outsider status. Few of them have jobs, but to keep their bikes on the road, food in their bellies, and beer flowing, they need cash. Some members sell drugs, others deal in firearms or steal motorcycle parts. George Weggers even enlists his girlfriends to work as strippers in the local bars.
A lot of people had girlfriends that worked in clubs. They were dancing and stuff. It was easy money, steady cash flow every day.
But a fantastic criminal opportunity comes with the new decade.
Then the 80s came along with cocaine. Everybody was into cocaine. Not just bikers, I mean everybody.
The Bandidos have a ready-made infrastructure that lends itself to drug dealing. Their Their nationwide membership provides a network of enforcers and drug distributors. Some Bandidos think nothing of riding across the country to make a drug deal. At this time, Weggers is the vice president of the Bellingham Bandidos. He can't resist getting involved.
All of a sudden, it wasn't about cheap $5 bags of bennies and, pot. It was about, $100 deals of cocaine.
Before long, the Bandidos are moving large quantities of drugs around the Northwest. Inevitably, their activities are noticed by the Drug Enforcement Agency, which embarks on a 5-year undercover investigation. By the early 80s, Weggers is a major cocaine dealer. In 1981, the DEA is tipped off. Agents find 5 kilos of cocaine in the trunk of Weggers' car. George Weggers is sent to prison for 5 years. The DEA investigation into the Bandidos continues, culminating in a nationwide bust on February 21st, 1985, reported by news stations across the country.
Hundreds of heavily armed federal agents today launched the biggest arrest effort ever against an American motorcycle gang, the Bandidos.
81 Bandidos are arrested and 14 indicted for crimes including drug running, murder, and kidnapping. By the time Weggers is released, the majority of the Washington Bandidos are either in jail or have left the club.
My plans when I got out of jail in '87 was to come back home and everything would be the same, but everything wasn't the same. There were a lot less brothers, a whole lot less.
Soon after leaving jail, George is made president of the Washington State Bandidos. Weggers has an epiphany that will change the Bandidos forever.
I realized that our reputation for violence and crime was doing nothing but hurt the club. We needed to change that. You can't ride your motorcycle in jail.
So Weggers sets out to change the Bandidos' image. He wants to ensure his members stop getting pulled over by the police for the way they look and behave.
Motorcycle clubs need to stop arguing, fighting, and bickering among themselves. We need to get into unison, or we'll find ourselves going the way of the American Indian. The federal government will just completely take us over.
He tells them to quit brawling and using drugs, and to find proper jobs.
George really did encourage people to clean up their acts and quit going to prison and quit getting killed and be a little more respectable.
If the Bandidos are not constantly being arrested for minor offenses, they can concentrate on making money. For many Bandidos, this means selling drugs and dealing in stolen motorbike parts. Back at Bellingham Police Headquarters, Al Jensen sees through Weggers' reforms.
They're trying to create a different image. They're going to tell you they're just a bunch of good old boys in a riding club that deliver toys for tots every year.
One thing, however, is certain. Weggers' changes are having the desired effect. During the next 5 years, few of the Washington Bandidos go to jail, and Weggers is able to recruit a new generation of bikers.
We started seeing chapters pop up all over Washington State.
The club grew. The club grew.
By 1998, 11 years after being released from prison, George Weggers has rebuilt his motorcycle club in Washington State. That same year, Bandidos National President Craig Johnston is arrested in Texas on a drug dealing charge. He's sent to prison for 10 years. The national officers of the Bandidos are summoned to elect a new president. George runs for the vacant office. He's cleaned up the Washington Bandidos and now wants to introduce his reforms nationally. But many of the old guard are opposed to the change. They like living on the dark underbelly of American society. As George heads to Texas, the future of the Bandido Nation hangs in the balance. 1998, George Weggers wants to be the national president of the Bandidos, the biggest outlaw motorcycle club in America. His reforms in the state of Washington have seen the Bandidos' membership rapidly expand. Now, he heads to the Bandidos' national headquarters in Galveston County, Texas. He's come to persuade the club's national officers that he should be president, But the odds are stacked against him.
A lot of the old-timers didn't want any change. They didn't want me to be the president. All the previous presidents had been from Texas. I was from Washington.
But this election is not about where the president comes from. It's about the future of the Bandidos. Weger's argument is simple. To remain an outlaw club, the Bandidos must change their public image. The old guard see themselves as outsiders and outriders, the last true American outlaws. They revel in their reputation as the dirtiest, meanest, and most violent of all the outlaw bikers. But George is not advocating change for change's sake. Wegers believes his reforms will transform the club and attract hundreds of new members.
I wanted them to be the biggest and the best club in the world.
After 24 hours of heated discussions and argument, the matter is put to the vote. The national officers agree that a change of image is a small price to pay to continue living their outlaw lives. Wegers is pronounced president.
There was a lot of change after that, a whole lot of change.
The first thing he changes is the system of joining the club. Joining an outlaw motorcycle club is never easy. Associate Professor William Delaney is a former outlaw biker who now studies the anthropology of American motorcycle clubs.
You have to earn that patch. It's a 3-step process. You hang around a club, then you prospect for the club, and then if you're lucky, you may become a full patch member of the club. Prospecting period is boot camp. You're at the beck and call 24 hours a day. You will get a call in the middle of the night just to see how long it takes you to react.
Prospecting in the Bandidos is especially tough. The slightest mistake earns the prospect a savage beating. This has deterred many people from joining the club. But there's a reason for the sometimes violent initiation ritual.
You didn't want to pick up just anybody. You wanted people with character. You wanted people you could trust. You wanted people that weren't cops.
If the prospect survives, he then faces the notorious Bandido initiation ceremony.
The urination on them and that kind of stuff, yeah. We did all that kind of stuff.
Wegers puts an immediate end to the beatings, the humiliation, and the urinating.
I don't think that you make a guy a better brother by blackening his eye or, making a fool out of him in front of people.
George's reforms have a profound effect on the club. He insists all members now wear immaculate vests. It's a remarkable change. Membership across the U.S. rapidly climbs. By 2001, there are 1,200 Bandidos in 80 chapters across the United States. The Bandidos have given up hell raising, but they're still outlaws. They remain prepared to use violence to protect their property, their territory, their bikes, and their women. They continue their criminal activities.
Crime and concentrations of bikers seem to go hand in hand. The numbers of those, of routine, of assaults, of bar fights, those just kept going up.
After Wegers is elected president, the Bandidos' national headquarters moves to Bellingham, Washington. Local Sheriff Bill Elfo has to deal with the consequences of more and more outlaw bikers passing through his county.
We've seen them involved in everything from theft of vehicles, motorcycles, dealing in methamphetamine, extortion, and all sorts of similar crimes.
In 2001, Detective Al Jensen initiates a criminal investigation.
We sat and looked at George. I mean, he was the international national president. He was the head of a criminal organization right here in our backyard. We just decided, let's take a run at him. Let's see what we can do. Let's see what they were involved in.
The first thing Al needs is good intelligence about the motorcycle club. He hires an informant, what the police call a cooperating witness.
Of course, our goal was to get our cooperating witness into the club, into the organization. We wanted the cooperating witness to become a Bandito.
This is easier said than done. The club would have to accept Repo Pete, the police informant, as a guy they're all prepared to befriend.
He became very close friends with the Bellingham chapter president, who was Glenn Merritt.
He did a lot of things around there just to make me trust him. You know, he'd sweep out the warehouse, to help mow the grass, go get a burger, he'd buy or I'd buy, and he was just like an everyday guy.
Repo Pete begins to buy stolen goods and drugs from Merritt, using money provided by the Bellingham police.
We were buying narcotics. We started buying ounces, multiple ounces of methamphetamines at a time from Glenn Merritt. We bought stolen guns.
Al is beginning to gather evidence of criminal activity. Yet on his main target, George Weggers, he has nothing. His informant can't get close to him.
George was the president. He was El Presidente. He was God. Hang around just didn't go up and slap him on the back. He waited until he was addressed.
Pete keeps trying to get close to Weggers. He attends every Bandito meeting and event he can.
I was standing talking to some of the brothers, and Repo Pete came up. He said something about my patch being a little bit dirty. And I said, I'll tell you what, you know, when I need somebody to tell me about my patch, my brothers will do it for me. I don't need you to do that. I said, just get out of here.
George has no interest in befriending hangarounds like Repo Pete. He's far more interested in expanding Bandito territory.
Territory is important. It's kind of like being a bully on the playground. You know, there's only one bully. And if another one comes along, then you got a problem. You can't have two kings in one place.
Weggers' method of taking over new territory is simple. He invites smaller clubs to give up their identity and join the Bandidos. The Bandidos' violent reputation and their strength in numbers makes this invitation an offer most bikers can't refuse.
They would just take over a club that was already in existence. So he just kept growing his army.
When you're the biggest guy on the block, people pay attention to you. If you got 3 members, you're not near so important as if you've got 3,000.
The Bandidos have always been the outlaw biker kings of Texas and Washington. Now George Weggers wants to expand the territory the Bandidos rule. He sets his sights on the state of Montana. But his first venture across state lines spirals out of control and might end up destroying the Bandidos and land Weggers in a federal jail. May 2002. The Bandidos are expanding their territory by moving into Montana. They start opening chapters across the state. The favored tactic? Invite small local outlaw clubs to replace their colors with that of the Bandidos. It's called patching over. George maintains the Bandito tradition of taking a patch as a trophy from each disbanded club. These are displayed like the spoils of war. But in Great Falls, Montana, a small outlaw club called the Kinsmen refused to patch over. They have the backing of one of the few clubs that can stand up to the Bandidos, the legendary Hell's Angels.
They were bragging that they were going to be Hell's Angels and Hell's Angel supporters, and they didn't support us in any way.
George Weggers won't tolerate a Hell's Angels satellite club operating in Montana. He decides to forcibly close the Kinsmen down. Great Falls cop Jeff Beecroft witnesses the hostilities.
One of the Kinsmen, his garage was used as a clubhouse, and that was firebombed one night. Kinsmen strongly believed that the firebombing was because Kinsmen weren't bending to the Bandidos.
Despite this attack, the Kinsmen refuse to comply. They move their clubhouse to their president's motorcycle repair shop. The Bandidos now send in their cavalry. Among them is Aaron Wise.
It was decided that we were going to go up and have a talk with the Kinsmen about no longer flying their colors in the state of Montana.
9 Bandidos pull up outside the Kinsmen's clubhouse. Armed with guns and knives, they've come to take the Kinsmen's patches. In outlaw biker culture, this is how clubs are shut down. They enter the shop and surround Scott Grizz Spencer, the Kinsmen's president.
The president of our chapter told them, well, we're here to disband you.
Fuck, Scully,
and get your colors, and you're going to call the rest of the members, and they're going to bring their colors down to the shop, and then that'll be that.
Surrounded by banditos, Grizz has no option but to do as he's told. He calls his brothers and tells them to bring their colors to his shop. Grizz claims his own patch is on a jacket at home. Aaron Wise accompanies Grizz to get it. According to the law, this is when the banditos become kidnappers.
Me and another member got in a pickup truck with Grizz. He drove to his house. He went inside, we followed him inside. He got his colors, we came back out, we got back in his truck with him, and he drove us back towards his shop.
In the meantime, kinsmen show up at Grizz's bike shop. Confronted by angry banditos, they have little choice other than to hand over their patches. Acting on a tip-off, heavily armed cops surround the shop. They believe a major crime is in progress and are braced for an armed confrontation. A local news crew captures their operation in progress.
Our officers set up an outside perimeter and basically caught the banditos inside of the business at that time.
Meanwhile, Grizz is driving back to his shop with two armed banditos sitting beside him. Obviously scared for his life, he decides to make a run for it.
Grizz jumps out the driver's side of the door and just jumps out of his truck while it's still moving. We look up and there's cops, and I don't know if it's ATF or SWAT team or who's out, but they're all over.
Aaron Wise and his brother Bandito run from the truck.
At that point, the two banditos ran through some yards, some housing project through there.
If the banditos are to be arrested, they don't want to be armed.
We had took any weapons that we had on us, which, I had a knife on me, and my brother had a weapon on him.
The banditos get rid of their weapons, but they can't flee the scene. The cops pounce.
They cuffed us and started asking us what's going on and who's inside the shop, and all my brother and I could say is, I don't know, because we're out here. We've been gone.
The cops' objective is to get all the banditos out of the repair shop. They're worried about a gunfight on the streets of Great Falls. The SWAT team establishes a security perimeter. Then the cops shout into the building. They demand that the banditos come out one at a time. One by one, they're handcuffed.
I honestly believe that they were just going to round us up and say, hey, you know what? Goodbye, boys. Thanks for causing a ruckus, but you're not welcome here, and go home.
But the cops believe they've caught the banditos in the act of a kidnapping.
Serious charges, though, against those two, and then the third person as well?
Assault with a weapon as well as kidnapping.
The banditos are charged with kidnapping, assault, and firearms offenses. Jeff Beecroft notices that two of them are wearing Washington State patches on their vests. He decides to call a contact in the Bellingham Police Department for advice.
Al and I had met at a conference, and I knew he worked the banditos and worked bikers, and so when we identified the two guys from his area, I notified him.
Beecroft and Jensen work on the case together for the next 5 months.
I tried to offer suggestions on what they needed to look for as far as colors and cuts and what to seize, who else might be there.
Despite this intelligence, the case quickly starts to unravel. Neither Grizz nor any of the other kinsmen will break the outlaw biker code. They refuse to testify against the banditos.
The victim refused to cooperate in the case. Without a cooperating victim, it was virtually impossible to prosecute the case.
The partying banditos have closed down the kinsmen, and they've also outwitted the cops. For Jeff Beecroft and Al Jensen, it's a humiliating defeat.
The banditos filed court orders to get all their guns back, and the judge signed that. They're feeling fairly cocky about that they'd won that battle.
But while sifting through the paperwork, Al Jensen comes across a significant lead that's been overlooked. Pen registers supplied by telephone companies. These registers list the time, date, and location of every call made on a specific phone.
We started going back and analyzing some of our pen registers, and then it became very obvious that during that kidnapping, there were telephone calls made from cell phones inside the building where the kidnapping was occurring to Glenn Merritt. Glenn Merritt then immediately called George Wagers. George Wagers would either call Glenn Merritt back, or Glenn Merritt would call right back to the kidnapping.
For Jensen, this is a significant breakthrough, potential proof that criminal acts are being directed by George Wagers.
Everything that was being done at that kidnapping was being controlled from here in our community by Glenn Merritt and George Wagers. That's when all of a sudden we realized we now have a line into a major criminal organization. They've been involved in violent crime across state lines. We have a RICO.
RICO is an acronym for Racketeer Influenced Corrupt Organization Act. It was introduced in 1970 to combat organized crime. Under RICO laws, the authorities only need to prove a connection between the leader and the criminal act. They don't need to catch the boss committing an actual felony. With this new information, Al Jensen starts to build a case that Wagers masterminded the kidnapping in Montana. If he's convicted under RICO statutes, Wagers faces life in prison. August 2003. Thanks to the expansion strategy of George Wagers, Montana is now a Bandido state. Opposing biker clubs throughout the Northwest have bowed before Bandido domination. Wagers appears all-powerful, but Al Jensen is determined to bring him down. The two men are locked in a fight to the finish. The next round takes place in Sturgis, South Dakota. Every year, this small town plays host to a week-long festival of drinking and brawling that attracts tens of thousands of outlaw bikers from around the country and around the world.
Sturgis is probably the largest motorcycle rally in the country. It's held every year.
This year, Al Jensen decides to go to Sturgis to continue his investigation of George Wagers.
This was a mandatory run year, so there was bandits from all over the country attending the thing.
For Bandidos, all members are required to attend the rally or pay a fine. Al follows George and the Bandidos to South Dakota.
Sturgis is a huge run, and as I say to people, Muslims go to the wall, bikers go to Sturgis. Oh, there's nothing like being at the front of the pack. There is nothing like it. I mean, to look in your rear view mirror and see a pack that stretches endlessly to where you can't even see the back of the pack. It's just an incredible sight.
Following their successful takeover in Montana, the Bandidos are eager to party. But the Hells Angels have other ideas.
Bandidos and Hells Angels do not get along. And apparently an incident occurred during that rally where George's son had been assaulted.
George Wagers can't and won't let the attack pass without responding.
George rode in with one of his National Sergeant of Arms right beside him, and they parked right in front of the Hells Angels store, which is right on Main Street. Bandidos went and lined up in front of the Hells Angels store, shoulder to shoulder, arms crossed, as a show of force. There was a face-to-face confrontation between George Wagers and Sonny Barger.
Sonny Barger is the legendary former president of the Hells Angels.
It was a rather heated argument, both being surrounded by their own club members. The confrontation kind of ended with George grabbing Sonny Barger and literally kind of picking him up. George went into Gunner's bar, and immediately we started seeing people from all the other clubs coming in groups, going in the bar, and basically coming in to visit George. He set up court in that bar.
The symbolism is obvious to all. George Wagers and the Bandidos are the biggest bully in town. Weggers leaves Sturgis and returns to Bellingham. He's faced down the Bandidos' oldest enemy, the Hells Angels. But George Weggers is far from untouchable. Al Jensen has phone records that prove Weggers orchestrated the Montana kidnapping of the Kinsman president from his home in Washington.
Our legal advisors told us that we could bring this case back up and we could recharge it as kidnapping under the federal statutes.
March 2005, Jensen takes his evidence before a federal judge. His aim? To get permission to tap George Weggers and Glenn Merritt's phones. The judge agrees to Al Jensen's request. But when he tries to get a wire on Glenn Merritt's cell phone, Jensen hits a snag and gets a lesson in outlaw biker lifestyle.
We had the wire room all set up. We had technicians brought in from various parts of the country to set this up. We had all the equipment there, agents in place, start listening to phone calls. We flipped the switch. Nothing happened. Both of his phones have been shut off that morning for lack of payment. He owed a $1,700 phone bill.
Paying his bills is not high on Merritt's personal agenda. In desperation, Jensen tells Repo Pete to pay the bill. The phones are reconnected. Al and the wire room team go to work. Over the course of the next 60 days, they listen in on every call and transcribe 5,815 phone calls. They hear lots of internal Bandido business, including George Weggers laying down the law on stealing from the club.
Listen, this is the deal. If he's brother, you got the right to take his. If you feel he needs a up, fine him. I feel if he deserves that big of a up, he deserves to lose his badge. We don't need him.
Jensen also learns a great deal about George Weggers' personal life.
Well, hope you get laid tonight.
Maybe, maybe not. Who knows?
But he's unable to connect Weggers to any crime.
They talk very, very little on the telephone about criminal activity. They were very aware of phone taps.
Most bikers just assume their phones are tapped all the time.
George has a message for the cops he assumes are listening.
I'm not doing nothing, honest I'm not. Nobody saw nothing, nobody can prove anything, Any more questions, call my attorney.
Detective Jensen gets nothing useful from the wiretap. He turns back to his informant, telling Repo Pete to start trying to become a full-patch Bandido. Glenn Merritt is now the president of the Bellingham chapter of the Bandidos. He wants Pete to become a full-patch member, but the decision is not his to make.
Pete was coming around and he wanted to, started thinking he wanted to prospect. And I explained to him that if he was going to prospect for the club, he would have to have everybody's vote, not just mine.
Pete isn't accepted into the club. George discovers he's already known to Bandidos in other chapters, and he isn't well liked.
People in the club knew Repo Pete from Bremerton, and they didn't have anything good to say about him.
George refuses to have anything more to do with Repo Pete.
I told one of the members that if he got within 10 feet of me, I'd knock him out.
Al Jensen's plan of having his informant become a full-patch Bandido is nixed. His investigation of George Weggers has run into another dead end. Now Jensen has only one more move to make. He reopens the Montana Kinsman kidnapping case under federal RICO laws. Hoping to provoke Weggers into revealing his involvement, Jensen calls in ATF to rattle the Bandidos.
We physically sent agents to visit every person that was involved in the Montana kidnapping case. And basically told them that we were reopening the case under federal statutes.
The sheriff pulls up and he comes out of his car, gun drawn, pointed at me. Hey, you Aaron Wise, I have an arrest warrant for you from the federal government for kidnapping and racketeering.
Just as Jensen hopes, the Bandidos start to panic.
And at that point, some of the phone lines start lighting up.
Al Jensen and his team are still recording all calls that George Weggers makes and receives. Montana bandito Billy Beach tells Weggers he's been visited by the feds.
What it's saying, the state might be done with, but the government ain't. They did? Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm worried. I always worry when things like this happen. Yeah.
The reopening of the Montana kidnapping case rattles George. He calls his oldest bandito pal and confidant, Jimmy Gorman.
I thought it was going to have me a fist fight with a couple feds. 4 of them.
Yeah.
4 of them.
Yeah.
They changed their mind.
I guess.
They did, or we'd have had one.
George lays down the bandito credo.
All of them need to do is just keep their mouths shut.
Al Jensen's ears perk up when George orders the banditos not to talk to the feds.
Make sure everybody knows we're not talking to those people. And not talking to those people means not having any conversation with those people.
You mean the people that are coming to visit?
Yeah, them feds.
Orders were given. George was very adamant that no one was to talk to the cops. He was very specific about that.
No, we don't talk to those guys, those feds. And that's all I said.
We're not having any conversation with those people.
For Al Jensen, this is the evidence he requires. He believes he's now got the proof to send Weggers and more than 20 other banditos to jail on federal charges of kidnapping, drug running, and racketeering. Al Jensen is planning the biggest bust of his career. Will he finally be able to bring down George Weggers? June 9th, 2005, Bellingham, Washington. After 2 years, Al Jensen's investigation of George Weggers and the Bandidos is about to come to a dramatic end. Jensen has finally got the evidence he's after. By ordering his brother Bandidos not to talk to the feds, Weggers incriminates himself and proves that he's the head of a nationwide crime syndicate. Al Jensen makes his move. Arrest warrants are drawn up for Weggers and more than 20 other banditos on charges of racketeering, kidnapping, drug dealing, and witness tampering.
We brought in over 200 agents from across the United States.
Jensen wants to be certain that security's maintained. He waits until the very last moment to brief his task force.
You could hear gasps in the crowd going when we said it was the Bandidos we were taking down.
The majority of the Bandidos are arrested between 6:30 and 8 in the morning.
It started at daybreak and they woke up to us hitting doors.
But Jensen decides not to smash down Weggers' door. To minimize the possibility of confrontation, he lures him outside.
He had a female officer call him under the ruse that she'd found a set of Bandito colors, and would he come get them?
I said, okay, I'll give you a call when I'm up and about. And she said, can you be there in 10 minutes?
Sure enough, he fell for it, came rolling out of bed, jumped in his car, met the female officer at the corner grocery store.
When I pulled into the parking lot, there was only 2 cops, and they walked around to the back and pretended they were going to open up the trunk, and then all of a sudden they put their hands on their guns and said, "You're under arrest," and then they just came from everywhere. Now, there were about 30 of them.
George Weggers is then taken to Bellingham's police station.
I'm sitting in the interrogation room. The door opens. Here comes Al Jensen and a ATF officer.
He kind of made the comment that, well, sometimes you win, sometimes I win. I said, well, yeah, we won this one.
Al Jensen's interrogation doesn't last long.
Of course, he didn't want to talk to us.